Okay, so this is where we've started the recording and the live stream, and here we go. So I'm Terry Cammerzell, and I'm here on behalf of Creation Fellowship Santee. We're a group of friends bound by our common agreement that the creation account, as told in Genesis, is a true depiction of how God created the world and all life in just 6 days, several thousand years ago. We've been meeting on this platform since May of 2020, and we've been blessed by a wide variety of speakers who love the Lord and have a message to share. They've brought us presentations that have been a blend of creation science, current events, and other theology topics as well. You can find a list of our upcoming speakers for the rest of 2023 by going to tinyurl.com/CF Santee. That's C like creation, F like fellowship, and Santee is spelled Santee. While there, you can also click on the link for archives to visit our brand new archives page that has a list of all of our past speakers, including the links that we have for their videos. You can also email us at creationfellowshipsantee@gmail.com to get on our email list so that you don't miss any of our upcoming speakers, and we promise not to spam you. Most of the time we do focus on, like I said, creation science topics or current events topics or even other theology. Tonight's a very special night. We study creation apologetics. We know that God created human beings to be very unique, that we were made in his image. And because of that, human life there's a sanctity to human life and dignity. And so tonight we really want to just take an opportunity to spotlight that and present to you guys an issue that's going on in the world that needs to have a little more attention. So our speaker tonight is Becky Rasmussen Simmons. She's a victim advocate, TV personality, YouTuber, podcaster, and founder of a successful nonprofit called Call to Freedom. She is well known in the Midwest for her advocacy since 2016 for anti-human trafficking. Call to Freedom brings wholeness to all individuals impacted by sex and labor trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation by navigating a healing path through our continuum of care model. Based out of South Dakota, Call to Freedom not only serves those in the state, but also the Midwest region. And if you're watching on the live stream on Facebook, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put those into the comments. And with that, Becky, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for having us today and the opportunity to share about Call to Freedom and what we're doing, but also what the Lord is doing through Call to Freedom and the opportunity to maybe reach some more people and to have a better understanding of this dynamic. So one moment here, I will get set up. So my name is Becky Rasmussen. I'm the CEO of Call to Freedom, and thank you for that very long intro. We appreciate that. Call to Freedom was founded in 2016, and many years ago, God impressed upon my heart a draw to the issue of anti-human trafficking. Little did I know at the time that what the call looked like or what that meant. I just kind of continued to follow God's journey and just serve in different capacities. In 2015, I felt God prompting to get involved with anti-human trafficking. And so I do what everybody do. I Google anti-human trafficking in South Dakota, and an organization under Tapestry International, which was named Call to Freedom, popped up. And I went to that luncheon. Fast forward to August of 2015, God called me to Sturgis, South Dakota, which is the largest rally, bike rally event in South Dakota. Long story short, I had a interaction with a young girl named Marissa, who had been found and went missing based on what I found out after my connection with her, which was about 10 minutes. And I began to ask the questions, how do you identify a young girl who's vulnerable? And then how do you lose her again? And Free International began to tell me that there were only 298 beds in the United States for victims of trafficking, and that they were re-recruited because of the lack of services that were available to those who were victimized by not only sex trafficking, but also labor trafficking. And I knew God was calling me to something, and I went and prayed. The woman who was doing this work at that time said, I feel like God is transitioning Call to Freedom to you. I want you to pray about it. And I did. And I felt like the answer was yes. And so founded Call to Freedom, applied for a 501c in November of 2015, was accepted in January of 2016, and opened our first doors in March. And survivors started coming forward. And never did I imagine the need to be so great. But today we are almost 8 years old in January, and we're at 27 staff. We just hired 2 more. We'll be at 30 by the end of July, and we're not slowing down because on an average, we see anywhere from 37 to 42% increases every year of new individuals walking through the doors looking for our services. So we're grateful to be here, and then I'm gonna let Mary introduce herself, and she's also part of the Call to Freedom team.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, you are one amazing person, and so is Call to Freedom is the amazing organization. So my name's Mary Jackson, and I work with Call to Freedom as their survivor program coordinator. I am a survivor, thriver, overcomer of sex and labor trafficking. I am here in the Midwest in South Dakota. I connected with Call to Freedom really to go in and serve. We had a mutual friend in common. I knew there was something going on with myself from things that I experienced over 20 years ago, where there was no help. There was no discussion on what even the word trafficking meant within the United States. And it definitely wasn't happening here, or people were not recognizing that it was. When I started with Call to Freedom, I went in and I served. I brought whatever needs the victims, the ladies that were coming out of, quote, the life, as the term is used. And there's so many needs, so many. And I sat down with Becky and started looking over her program, giving insight into maybe like the mindset, our responses, how much we need people to walk alongside us, to accept us, to understand a little bit, and not that anyone's really going to understand what we went through physically and mentally and spiritually. But Becky has a gift that God has graced her with and covered Call to Freedom. I've been with them now. Becky, I don't know, since 2016, 17.
2016.
And I've watched it grow. I've watched the women that I mentor and how they grow in every aspect of their life, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So I'm very, very humbled and grateful to be here.
You know, this is about the Lord. The Lord has made it very clear in many conversations that I've had with him that this is his ministry. And the heart that the Lord has for those that are in distress, that are in human trafficking situations, the times that I'm in prayer, the teams in prayer, the depth of love and compassion that he has, we can feel. And with our goal is to exemplify that, to model that as well as we can, and being human beings. But there's a scripture in Psalms 118:5 that says, out of my distress, I called upon the Lord answered me and set me free. Now, one of the keys is everybody says, hey, you're going to go rescue a victim of trafficking. And, you know, Mary can talk about how we don't like the word rescue because the only person who can rescue and set somebody free is Jesus. But the key to this scripture is out of my distress. And many survivors have walked through the door. Many victims who've gone on to be survivors have walked through the doors of Call to Freedom saying, I called out to a God that I didn't know and I was very angry with. My trafficker would victimize me in the name of Jesus. And so I didn't know, I was confused about who God was and why he would allow this to happen to me. But the faithfulness of God when they get to a point, and journeys look very different, it doesn't look one way for a survivor, that they cry out to God just in that moment of surrender. He has been so faithful. And I think one of the things, and I'm going to let Mary talk about this because she's an example of that story, is that we have to remember is that God needs people to work through. This is very much God's heart. It is very much the Lord's heart to set the captives free. I feel it all the time when I pray. I observe it when he works through Call to Freedom and those that serve. But it is that survivor's choice. And when they make that cry out to God, he is so faithful to answer. And so, Mary, this is a perfect opportunity to share what you would like.
Yes, thank you. So I'm from South Dakota, and I would have probably been considered the girl next door. I attended a local Christian high school and 1 year of college in a Christian college. And for reasons of some emotional and verbal abuse within my own family, I just never felt that I belonged. I was raised in a Christian household. It is more the words that were spoken to me that I would never amount to anything. I needed to be better at what I was doing. I wasn't like my other siblings. And so I just really did not feel that I was worth it. And I didn't really express that. There wasn't really a lot of people to talk to about it. I did end up moving to the East Coast. I did meet a group of people that befriended me and got to know me and really said, we'll take care of you. So these would be my traffickers. And eventually one of the traffickers would end up to be my husband. I had moved to South America, and these people were a part of during the 80s and the 90s, there was a cartel called the Medellin cartel. So I moved down there and I was just brainwashed. That was through physical abuse, sexual abuse, spiritual abuse also. So they controlled every aspect of my life. When I wanted to leave, I had become pregnant. When I wanted to leave, something in me stirred when I had my son. And I sat outside and I told my ex-husband now that I'm leaving. And there's a lot behind that, but it would take too long probably to go into detail, a lot of that. And he said, no, that you aren't leaving. You make us too much money. The criminal activity behind trafficking and setting up LLCs, setting money laundering, there's a lot of different aspects that also fall into sex and labor trafficking. And they would not let me leave. And they said, you're going to do this one last thing. And when you do that, then you can go. So I thought, okay, great. Let me do this. And they said, but just for our reassurance and for our kind of insurance on you, we are going to take your 2-month-old son. So the night before, I knew that they were going to come and take my 2-month-old son. I sat outside, and sorry, sometimes I cry about it because I know the goodness of the Lord. And I sat outside holding my 2-month-old son. And I prayed. I just prayed so hard. I said, God, these are just people. I don't know how to leave. I'm being held. I don't have documents. I can't get my son out. They're coming tomorrow to get him. And I prayed and I said, Lord, bring me home to my earthly home, however you do it. But bring my son and I home. I didn't ask for any of this. So it was pretty quick in what happened, because the next day, then they came and took my son, and I was forced to commit a crime. I did serve federal time for that. And I think when I look back, I did come home. We did get my son back after 2 years. And I thanked God for bringing me home. And sometimes I sit back and say, gee, did I really have to go through all of that to get home? And I now know, because when I pray and I ask God to show me and show me discernment, and that I needed to go through that, it really saved my life. I wouldn't be alive today as many of the people that I know, uh, people that were victims. I wouldn't be here today had not God placed that path. And it was suffering, but yet there was joy and restoration when I came home. And now I use that to show other victims when they come out, survivors, that there is hope for us, that we are lost, that people care, people love us unconditionally, and that God loves us. We just have to reach out. And that was the day I was physically free. Mentally was a different story, and also spiritually, because I did have a lot of unchristian like things that were done to me. And so that was also a path. And I remember that day that I was spiritually free. I cry about that too, but not cries of sadness. I laid on the floor in my family room. I simply could not handle life. I didn't know what to do. There wasn't services for me. And this was how many years back? I couldn't even handle myself and what was I experiencing, even physically being free, but not mentally and spiritually free. And I laid on that floor and I cried and I spread my arms out and I said, God, I am yours. And that I am your daughter. And I know that you love me and I am yours. And I hand everything to you because I cannot do this alone. I've tried. I fought my battle trying to think I could do it myself. And that isn't the answer. Something came over me that day. And there was a peace and a calmness in my life. And it was like I knew what I needed to do then. And somehow it just, once I answered that call to bring that hope, explain that this does happen, it is real. And it can happen to anyone. It doesn't, trafficking and labor trafficking doesn't know any boundaries. There are people who are more vulnerable to being trafficked. And we want to, obviously you focus on all the vulnerabilities, but really anyone can be trafficked. I was the girl next door. I mean, my first year of college, I was going to be a nun. So what led me is a whole different story in itself also. But thank you, Becky, for letting me share that.
Well,
I even got through it without crying too
I
much.
know you did. You did. It is a beautiful gift to see when God restores a person's life, but he always has somebody else in mind. He always knows he loves Mary. He favors Mary. But he had other survivors in mind in working alongside Mary and the team. When survivors first come in, there's a lot of anxiety, fear, survival mode that we call it. But when Mary walks into the room, or other survivors like Mary, and you have somebody who's in a cartel organized type of trafficking, you don't survive. Mary represents a miracle and hope to a lot of those that walk through the doors. And our hope is that as you hear what we're talking about, and hear as we talk about call to freedom and those that we serve, and what the Lord's doing, because he is doing something and it's good. Amen. That you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you didn't know. And so a lot of people, this is it's a deep topic, and there's a lot of layers to this topic that people don't want to hear. But what I want to challenge people today is God can work through people. And if you are on this podcast, and I really felt led to include this, that God's calling you to go deeper, or he's calling you to a certain area that now and you're going to know, and God's going to impress upon your heart. But I'm also saying this to the community, the community, we need to talk about human trafficking. We need to take what is the enemy likes to keep in the dark, because it can manifest in the dark. We need to bring light to it. And when we know that this is happening within our communities and it's happening within our state, we can't look the other way. And that's really Call to Freedom's model, is that as a survivor walks through the door and we learn their story, and there's another layer or another form of trafficking, we can either choose to look the other way, or we can allow God to use us as the answer. And so today I want to encourage people to know that God wants to use people to be the answer. And so when I was praying and when I first started seeing visions or glimpses in 2016 of what Call to Freedom was to look like, and I'm grateful he didn't download the entire vision all at one time. I believe that was his grace. I think I probably would have been a little overwhelmed. One of the first things he said was unite a community. And I didn't know what that meant. And I kept saying to the Lord, what does that mean? What does it mean to unite a community? And all of a sudden people would walk through the doors and say, I have this gifting, I have this passion, I want to do this, or I can hold an art class, or I used to be on a security team, I can be on your security team. I realized that there was a lot of people that wanted to do something about this movement, and wanted to be a part of answering the call for freedom. And so we started creating these unique opportunities for the community to be part of the answer, from doing events to serving on the security team to being grocery shoppers. And you can look on our website. All of a sudden, I started God creating not only an army, a real army and a community that said no more. And I think there's power in unity. And when you can get people behind a vision for unity and have that unity, God can do great things, as we've seen in the Bible and multiple different testimonies of that in the Bible. And they also continue to set the captives free. And what I knew was important is we began, like you heard Mary, we started journeying life with survivors. We realized that there wasn't one set story in what this looked like, and that you can't do program just one set way, as that you really need it. And that's why when I do this with Mary or another survivor, because their voice has such power. And their insight is something we've never experienced, but it helps us do our job better. And so in order for us to continue to set the captives free, we have really had to focus on how do we have the best programming. And that is covered with a lot of prayer, a lot of grace, and the continuation of the funds to come in to expand those services to those that we serve. And I am telling you, some of the most difficult people, and Mary and I were just talking about this the other day, that I thought, how are we ever going to reach that young girl? How? Like, I know God can, but that's going to take a miracle. We are seeing miracles, are we not, Mary? We are seeing.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And people, that's only going to be God, and God is doing it, where mental health is getting healed, and they're coming back, and they may not get it right away, but they know that there is always grace with Call to Freedom and those that we serve. And so a little bit about us before we jump into what is trafficking as a whole on this program. But we were established. We now have a home that houses women and their children. And that has been the greatest gift. We actually started housing, it's called Marissa's House, based on the young girl that I had met in Sturgis, South Dakota. And we started just with a little efficiency apartments, renting a unit. That was the first time Mary served, right? And they were very small, but the women started doing really well, and they had this deep desire to be reunified with their children. And because they looked like they weren't good parents, and you can hear a little bit in that Mary's story, it was not by their choice, it was by force. They lost their children in that process, and they had this deep desire to be reunified, and God made that a reality. He heard their cries, and they would leave our program early, and we knew we got to do better than this. And so in 2020, early 21, the God impressed upon our heart to build a facility that's a 12-unit facility, and have the community rally behind us. And today it was built, fundraised, and paid in full in a year and 4 months. It opened April 1st of 2022, and we are currently housing 12 survivors and 10 children. The beauty of this is we've had in 1 year 8 survivors successfully graduate from Marissa's house, and we've had 9 reunifications. We're on almost 10, so it's happening right now. So we're going to say we're close to 10 reunifications of moms with their children, but it's a safe, supportive housing unit that allows them to do life with support. So being a parent, getting a job, learning how to navigate just systems as own, and having a counselor, and having those things that are support. And Mary, you want to talk a little bit about the survivor support group that you're leading as well within the house?
Yes. So nationally, I am on a support group. And this support group is just amazing for myself, letting me know that I'm not alone, that there are other people out there that really understand. And so when Becky and I had talked, Becky brought up, and we decided that we needed a support group here for the women and in Marissa's house. The women they are so appreciative to be educated, to be empowered, to know what happened to them was not their fault, that they may be the victim, and with time, they no longer have the victim mentality. They can make choices. And with all that Call to Freedom offers for all these services that I have looked in, when Becky had asked me one day, what do victims on their journey of healing need in their life? And I just remember that clearly, Becky. I don't know if you do. I looked at you and I said, it's more like, what don't we need?
Yeah.
And from that, there is so much, and all the women that I have talked to within the support group just cannot believe the amazing that they are valued, heard, and they all want to know. I mean, we have a spiritual coordinator also. They want to know about Jesus. They want to know that God loves them, and they know God loves them, but it's just coming together and walking alongside them.
And I think the biggest too is a place to belong. Traffickers are
Yes.
very good at manipulating, and they'll find your weakness. You know, trafficking, we see the movie Taken, and we think, and it can happen that way, but more than likely it doesn't. It's more of that building of a relationship, and they will find your vulnerability and become the answer to that vulnerability. So you feel like you have a place to belong. And so what the enemy has taken as something that's a deep desire for us as individuals, all of us want to belong somewhere. We want to be a part. The enemy has used this trafficking, human trafficking movement to really distort what God created to be beautiful. And so how do we then recreate this, right, as an organization and as a community, for them to belong and to be understood and to be valued, and dignity, as we were talking about, the wholeness of the person. And that's really a process of understanding who you are in your victimization, but also that you were victimized, and that what they manipulated as you belonging, you know, wasn't necessarily what God intended, and recreating that into something beautiful. And that's what we've watched with Mary's support groups, is they're like, I'm not alone. You know, I thought this would just happen to me. I'm believed. All of those things that they didn't think, because they are held in silence and isolation, that the community wouldn't. And now God's using it and turning it for good.
And I think also with the fear of talking about it, also knowing the different types of traffickers, that it's not a cookie cutter approach. Everyone has their own journey, their own story. What happened to me, it's not, I mean, people say, well, that doesn't happen to people. Well, then we're kind of losing what actually happened. And what happened was I was trafficked. I was sex trafficked and I was labor trafficked. And that it does happen. So again, there's different types of trafficking. If you have questions on those, and I know Becky talks very well about the different types of trafficking and who the traffickers are. Because really a trafficker can really be anyone. It can be someone in your family. It can be a gang. It can be a group. It could be the cartel. There's different types of trafficking, but one thing in common with so many of the victims is we want to belong and be accepted. And whatever that looked like, I mentored a young lady who was born into trafficking. So that was the only life that she knew. And that was love for her. That's what she felt love was.
And she was a tough one. Probably one of
yeah.
the toughest, because that's all she ever knew. And God just kept bringing her back, and just looking at her today. And I want to just touch, and then we'll open it up to Terry and the team. But this isn't just, hey, one person working with a survivor. The complex trauma that's involved with the complex needs, a person who's coming out of human trafficking. This is how this continuum of care model through Call to Freedom was developed, through a lot of prayer, a lot of walking with survivors, and not having those services in place and saying, we can do this better. I believe that God is a God of excellence. I believe that God wants to provide excellence in all he exemplifies. And I believe that at Call to Freedom, we're called to exemplify excellence, because guess what? Everybody who walks through the doors deserves that. For so long, they have not been honored, and God wants to restore that honor back to them. And so we're a part of that journey in this continuum of care model. So you've heard from Mary from the survivor-led mentorship. But addiction is a big part of those that we serve, because a lot of individuals are controlled by substance abuse or, medicine or, drugs to can keep them in that victimization. And so where there is a lot of addiction navigating that we do, mental health that we have to address. And then also, before we can even get them to the housing stage and to some of those other stages of the next phase of that journey of healing. And so what you're seeing here is a combination of occupational therapy, clinical services, but also emergency addiction services, because those are real struggles for those that we serve when they walk through the doors. And what we've found is Jesus can set people free. I've seen it, I'm seeing it, but people have to know how to maintain their freedom. And the model that you see here gives survivors and individuals the tools to be able to maintain their freedom when they get it, because you got to know how to deal with those fiery darts that come your way, and those next step of that person who sounds good coming back into your life and trying to influence you. And so this model was really developed based on our life and journeying with survivors, but also the input of Mary. You need this in your program, you're missing this, and really always looking at how can we be more successful. And I've actually heard people say that we're kind of like a case management on steroids in the sense that we will not leave people until they choose to leave us. And I feel like that is something that they have never experienced. And I think it's very important, and is a very grace-filled approach to those that we serve. Did you want to say anything about this, Mary?
No, I just think all of these services are vital in everyone's step, because ultimately you're trying to reach for that freedom that you can make you make your own choices. Are we making healthy choices? Not healthy choices. Our behaviors, our responses to our quote triggers. What is drawing us back? What was our vulnerabilities? And for myself and many, many survivors nationwide, this continuum of care, taking that whole person, surrounding that person and saying, we care unconditionally for you, and that you matter and that you are loved. So I get kind of a little emotional about that. Sorry, Becky. But I have seen most of the survivors that I've mentored utilize these services. And they might not like it at the moment. They might get a little, I don't have to have that. I don't need that. But once they start that, and then they'll be like, Mary or Becky or whomever, their case manager, wow, you have this. I could really use this. Wow, that's like amazing that you guys all do that. And I'm like, yes. I don't know. I look at that, Becky, and the audience. I'm in awe of where you started in 2016 and how God has covered this and grown, and the people walking through the doors. It's sad that we even have to have services, or that we even have to talk about something like this. And you hope someday that you wouldn't have to. But it's real, it's out there, it's happening I think I know survivors in most states. Some have federal cases, state cases. Mine was a federal case. And I would have sure loved to have had this, because my prayers are for a victim never to have to wait as long as they did, as long as I did, to receive help and to know that somebody cares.
So I know that went a little long, Terry, but we appreciate the opportunity to share, and we'll turn it back to you.
Oh,
This
no,
is-
actually, that didn't go long. Go ahead, Robin. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, thank you, Mary. I'm the same thing. Like, why do we even have to talk about this kind of thing? But it's so real, and it's so hidden, but the world is just getting increasingly dark. And so it's really nice that you guys are a bright spot.
Thank you. I know having the tough conversations, yeah, they're tough conversations, but is the reality, and it is happening. And if we don't have the conversations and say enough, that we're not going to accept this in our city, our state, in our nation, worldwide, we stand for no, we choose to shine the light. And I am grateful. I'm grateful for everybody on here. You have no idea. I'm sure when it's all done, I will have to discern, and I will have to pray, just because I'll be overwhelmed that that people care, and that God has given me a voice, and I am obviously grateful.
Well, we do have some questions, and so I just want to remind you guys. I'm sure that you know, and also remind the people that are here in the Zoom room that we are still live streaming and recording. So any of the questions that you guys ask at this point are going to be public. So that means also to you guys, Becky and Mary, if there's any that you feel uncomfortable answering on the recording, please let us know, and we can save them for just back inside the Zoom fellowship room at the end. So the first one comes from Robin. She'd like to ask just a little bit, if you could, Becky, explain a little more about the different types of trafficking, and specifically like what is labor trafficking? Like what does that look like more?
Sure. So human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit somebody for either the sex or labor exploitation, unless you're under the age of 18. If you're under the age of 18, force, fraud, and coercion does not need to be proven. Now, what does that mean? That means that if there's an exchange, a monetary exchange for either sex or labor against this person's will, then that is a trafficking situation. Under the age of 18, it does not have to be against their will. It could be survival sex. It could be just the sextortion and the exploitation that we're seeing online. When we talk about labor trafficking, some examples of that are we see quite a bit in our area, and it looks different. Mary talked a little bit about using LLCs and using people's social security numbers, or forcing them to come across with doing distributions or possession charges, that could cross over into some of that labor part as well. What we see a lot of in that labor trafficking is within the foreign national population. And so they are being exploited in restaurants, or being exploited in farming communities. And what that means is you have exploitation, and then you go to trafficking, and there's overlying elements of exploitation into trafficking. The way that it becomes trafficking is that that person cannot leave those scenarios. So they cannot freely come or go in those scenarios. And so it's really important, because sometimes traffickers are really good at creating this fine line and creating this manipulation in these mind games where people feel like they are choosing to be in that lifestyle because of the manipulation and because of the grooming techniques. But if there is an exchange and they were held against their will, so it could be a possession, my identification, they were controlling me by my housing. If any of those items are, if any of those elements are present, we are talking about human trafficking. And that could be either in sex or labor.
Oh, thank you. That was very good. I thought there was more to it. Than what I thought. Thank you. That really cleared it up.
And then your ministry is based in South Dakota. We talked about that. And then in the introduction, I mentioned that you guys reach through the Midwest. Do you go beyond the Midwest? I mean, how far does your ministry reach out to?
We have gotten survivors from pretty much every county in the state of South Dakota, but we are getting calls from Michigan, Florida. We're taking survivors from Ohio. We are really seeing that other individuals that don't have these services within their communities, they're desperate to be able to help survivors out of these situations, that we've moved 9 states one way or another. But I would say our main focus has been South Dakota, with people fleeing to South Dakota to come to find Call to Freedom too. We've had families that have come all the way from, deep South that heard about Call to Freedom, and they said, I heard you can help us get free. And they drove all the way, and they're free. And so we're open to everyone. Again, the primary that we serve is the Midwest.
Wow. And that answers a little bit more, because Robin's next question was that South Dakota seems so sane. Most our group is based, although we've had members flee California to other states, but our group is technically based out of California, and of course we would expect that in California, but to hear South Dakota, although I will mention that I have a friend here with us in the Zoom room who also lives in South Dakota, and she was saying just now to me that Sturgis, I guess, is a big activity where a lot of bikers come, and there's a lot of incidents there of human trafficking.
Yeah.
So
yeah, large events in South Dakota is a Sturgis rally and hunting season. Those are easy to cover, those, because we don't have on the ground operations investigating. So when it isn't being identified, it's easy to facilitate. But we also do have in the United States, out of the 10 poorest counties, we have 6 of them in South Dakota on our reservations. When you're talking about murdered and missing indigenous women, what we've seen is this influx because of the poverty level and some of the dynamics of those in our reservations. That has become a very hot area in our rural communities. These individuals thrive in small communities and poor communities because they don't have the resources to investigate or protect. And so when we're shipping people off, or we're going in a rural community and they only have 3 sheriffs, we're prime example for them to come into our communities and stay under the radar and off the radar. And that's where this thrives. So in California, you would probably have a lot more investigators and police maybe investigating these cases. In South Dakota, we don't have specialized teams doing these investigations. And so this is why we're seeing an increase in the South Dakota area.
okay. Next question is I'm getting questions from different places, so I'm trying to
You're doing great,
also...
Terry.
Okay. Next, then, do you guys coordinate with other similar ministries in different areas of the country or world to help, team up and have a bigger impact?
Yeah, this isn't just one organization that does this work. And so survivors we need to show survivors that we can work together and that we can coordinate services. And so when somebody's coming from another state, and they come to South Dakota, or South Dakota is no longer a safe place for them, or we're navigating a case out of Vegas, which we've done before. We work with other anti-human trafficking groups or other nonprofits in that area. Mary, you can talk about this. Many times survivors will come and flee to Call to Freedom, and then they're still in that survival mode where they're scared, they don't trust, and then they'll get in their car and take off again. And you've been on the call with them several times, right, Mary, and trying to navigate them through some of those scenarios.
Well, and it's more that you might know that there's a service in that area, but you don't feel safe, whether it's founded or unfounded. It is the wiring of our brain. And you just need to go. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that in life where they're just like, I got to get out of here. I can't handle what's going on. I got to go. And that's our reaction to a lot of our trauma. So there was a family, and they were in South Dakota from the deep South, and they came through and we did all that we could. Sometimes you're that kind of that mustard seed that plants that hope in somebody to say, we are here, we will never leave you. Sometimes people do have to find that out on their own, because it is their life. You can't have somebody go from a controlling environment to another controlling environment. And they just decided to leave. They were going to flee to Canada, and they'd call me. They'd say, Mary, we're this part of the state. We're in Wyoming now. There's a blizzard outside. We're on the interstate. We're going 20 miles an hour. And I kept saying, okay, so do you have a next stop? Can we help navigate? So we help navigate that for them, for each stop, for them to stay, getting in contact with either a domestic violence shelter or another anti-human trafficking group out there that would help allow them to make that decision that they were going to flee to Canada. Well, they get pretty close and they decide, we're going back to South Dakota because I think it was 2:00 in the morning. They had called me. I couldn't sleep. I was with them because knowing that somebody is there for you. I'm on the phone. I'm making pancakes at 2:00 in the morning. Just nervous with them because they're in this blizzard and the interstates are closed, and they're driving in the interstates, and they came back and they are thriving.
Yeah. They stayed with us.
Yep. They recognized the help, and then they recognized I would receive these services here. And actually I need to get back there because they're the ones that I kind of connected with better. Not to say that, because people work together all the time. It's just everybody has an individual journey.
Yeah, that's understandable. How do you guys get in touch? Like, how do survivors find you, or do you guys actively go out and look for them to be able to bring them in?
Yeah, so survivors are referred to our program. And so we get referrals from addiction centers, domestic violence shelters, emergency departments, law enforcement, other survivors. We actually have specialized case managers, and Mary just went in here that go into the women's prison. Because we've identified a lot, like Mary's story, that forced criminality piece. And so we have really made that component of educating first responders and how to identify this is really key to getting those referrals. And once we do that, and then we get the referrals from these various different services, now we've seen a large portion of our referrals come from other survivors. So when other survivors know that you know what you're doing and they can successfully get out, they then feel comfortable referring other survivors to your program. And if they don't trust it and they don't believe it, they're pretty good, then they won't refer. And that, I think that is probably the largest compliment that we've gotten, is that other survivors are telling others how they can get out, and that there is help, and that they can be safe, and they can have their basic needs met, and they can be successful and have hope. And that's really key. There's a stat that 3% of victims are ever identified. That means that 97% of people never leave trafficking situations for a variety of reasons. And if we don't go out and actively also do outreach, right, that training and getting into those youth programs and getting out, a lot of times there's not identification within the systems. Most times survivors don't self-identify because they think they're making that choice because of that manipulation. And so we as service providers and we as a community need to do a better job of going after these systems and going into these systems on outreach as well. On the labor trafficking piece, that's a little bit harder. That really takes more of an outreach piece. And we're looking at kind of getting that where it needs to be. I think we have a lot of work to do in that area, but we need somebody who can go into those communities, into those cultures, and reach out and spend time on the farming community, spend time in the plants, spend time in those community churches where this is happening, maybe in industries, but they're all going to church, that's where we're going to reach that labor trafficking. And there's just a lot of work to be done on that. So we get referrals in a lot of different ways. We'll get calls from law enforcement on a rescue. We got one where we had to go pick up, and we had our security teams. We don't have to do that a lot, but we are equipped to do that as well.
Well, and you mentioned church, but from a different perspective, Bill has been asking a little bit. He came on late, and he had a question about, do you rescue any victims from church situations where it's not really a healthy church? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like there's something wrong in that church.
Yes, the answer is yes. We have one functioning right now that is posing as a church. I mean, think about this. The enemy thrives in distorting what God meant for good. And if I can take away anything good and take away hope, I can keep people in darkness. And so some of the safe places that people feel, now it isn't a lot, we have experienced that, and that's where the key of healthy relationships, being able to understand on some of those social media pieces, but we have worked where churches have been utilized to facilitate trafficking. Yes.
Yeah, it's hard.
Sad.
Robin has another question about the cartels. So she said, can you explain more about cartel traffickers? And specifically, she says in San Diego, there's a place where you can go and people arrange for young boys and girls to meet with adults. Have you heard of this?
Do you want to try that, Mary? Or do you want me to?
Yeah. There's so much. Sometimes when I start in my experience and what I saw, witnessed, what happened to me, anytime there is money to be made, people will try to get money, because at the end of the day, that is what it's about. So in the cartel, not everyone is the same, but they are all basically connected. I don't go into too much detail about that. But when you have a cartel, depends on the level of the person in that cartel and the hierarchy of that cartel. And so if you're talking with the sex trafficking, I would say for myself, if I was not, quote, walking on the street, as somebody asked me one time, I was more within parties. A drug deal gone good, I would have been sold over here. Drug deal gone bad, I would have had to go over here. Also at parties. So there is a lot depending on the level of the cartel. So cartel, it can be involved in, they're involved in the human trafficking, they're involved in arms dealing, they're involved in drug dealing. So anywhere there is room to make money, and the money laundering side and how that's all facilitated, it's very complex. And again, as I was told, it is strictly money, that if you didn't have a buyer, because it's supply and demand, so at the end of the day, that victim is considered a commodity.
And I think
Thank
too,
you.
when we talk about the value of life, there is no regard for life. There is a price tag on a person, and that's their value. And to break that person down, to devalue them in every way, to control them, there are online, we have we just had a social media training with a human trafficking Interpol investigator, and she's actually going to be doing more. So go to calltofreedom.org and you can see those. But she actually goes onto the black web and sees how this is facilitated, and it's pretty sickening. The ads that you will see, the requests that they have, the schooling that people actually teach people how to become traffickers. They teach you how to recruit boys and girls. They teach you how to then advertise to sell them. There are classes on the black web to teach people how to do this. And this is why I'm such a firm believer in praying for the full cycle of trafficking, because there is no way humanly possible that we can break that cycle because of this evil power dynamic, from buyers to traffickers to victims, right? You got this whole cycle. Well, if we don't address the buyers, we're going to have more victims than we ever knew, because we're not addressing the core problem. Traffickers are business people, man. They're there to make money, and it has no regard for life. And so if they can make money and they can facilitate, then that trafficker is going to find whatever that demand side wants. And so we have ways that aren't physical building locations now, that this is facilitated online. And so we really need to pray. I mean, that is the only way that we're going to combat this cycle, is through prayer. And that is also praying for the buyers and praying for the traffickers, that cycle is broken and their hearts are changed and God reaches them, because only God can change that kind of evil. Only God. And not
Amen.
Becky or Mary by any means. Like, we're not equipped. Nor we can
I would
pray,
say I always say it took me a while to
Yeah.
reach to praying for the trafficker and the buyer. I understand it now on my journey, but at the time,
Yeah.
it was awfully difficult.
And hear my heart, not asking the victims to do that, but the people that are
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a very delicate journey. Absolutely, Mary. But I think as the church, if we can take this as prayer initiatives and we can battle this where we know to battle it, and that's, in the realms of the spirit, God can do some amazing things. He's always been faithful.
Terry, I have a quick question. You hear all kinds of, these little things people put on Facebook or social media, how you can tell if somebody is being trafficked or if they're in a position where they're being held against their will. Is any of that true? How would you identify somebody who's, being kept against their will? I guess I think of it as somebody in a closet, locked up, not walking around.
Yeah, no, that's not. It's more of a mind manipulation to control. You heard Mary's story too, I have your child. There are usually controlling elements behind the scene that you don't have to put somebody in a closet to keep them. There are a lot of ways to control somebody through their basic needs, through family, through fear, through I love you. There are a lot of different ways. When it comes to identifying on social media, these guys are right now, the latest that we've seen, one of the latest that we've seen is targeting of young boys. And there are actually groups in third world countries that have what are called boiler rooms. And they sit online 8 hours plus a day, and they are hired to target your kids. So they are specifically creating fake ads. They're creating, I'm a beautiful model girl, and I want to get to know you, to young boys. Send me a nudie pic. The sextortion begins. We are seeing not only sextortion, but then leading into trafficking, to leading into blackmail, and then suicides, because there aren't programs for young boys. And so this is very purposeful business. They will find where we're not doing the work, and they will target those individuals. And so social media, you got to know who you're talking to, and get on with your kids and be involved and get trained and have passwords. I don't care. Kids do not understand who they're talking to because they don't have the emotional and mental capacity to be able to discern that like we do as adults. And sometimes adults fall for this too. So these guys are master trickery and at deception, and they will find your vulnerability and become the answer to it. And so now with social media, it's become so easy to connect with people that you really have to know that this is not just facilitated face-to-face, it's online, it's face-to-face, it's through friends. We've had individuals that have had, girlfriends who are their peers, friends that are working for a group to recruit girls. And so know who your friends are of your children, get involved. And I'm going to do a little plug for this book that we have. If you want to know more, Mary and Ruth, and Mary, you can talk about this, but you're going to go to calldofreedom.org, and under Call to Freedom, and it's a parent's guide to understanding human trafficking and healing their children. You can order that online or on Amazon. Do you want to talk about that, Mary?
Yeah, really, this book started as Ruth, who is a grandmother of one of the first survivors that walked through the door of Call to Freedom. Her and I collaborated, worked on it for over about a year. It's her words, her lived experience. It's the real deal. It's not sugar coated. It's not really complex in reading. It's very easy to read. And then I lent my writings. Some other survivors also contributed their writings so that people really understood what the true journey was. Not something that is either a scare tactic or a fear tactic, that we are people, we are someone's daughter, we are someone's friend, we are someone's sister or brother. Men and women are both sex and labor trafficked.
Yeah, and I think we still have a few more questions, but the next one, an average person who isn't necessarily living in a world where this happens, like most people are not aware, so I think kind of going back to what Robin was saying is if people were in a public place like an airport or an amusement park, are there any signs that an average person like me or somebody else would look for to be alert and to say, I think that that's not safe? Like maybe that's a victim right there. Is there anything I should do? So what kind of advice do you have for people like that?
Yeah, and you want to look for that control piece. Somebody who's not traveling or alone. They might be a younger girl with an older man, or an older woman with a younger boy. It could be a variety of different. They don't have access to their personal information. They may not know where they're at. Their clothing may look not necessarily appropriate for the area that they're in because they may have them traveling, and they don't have access to their personal identification. And if you go up and talk to them, that they won't look you in the eye, and they're very fearful. and submissive to somebody around them. You know, a lot of times we don't see the physical, because it's more of those mental chains that are happening. And so those are some key areas. Branding is another. We're not seeing that as much with some of the tattooing, but some of the tattooing can serve as branding. And do you have any others, Mary?
No, I mean, I think that you're hitting them. There's just, when something doesn't feel right, it's not right.
Yeah.
It could be something else, but you're better to say something, but not rush in and try to quote rescue, because you're putting yourself in danger. You're also putting that person in danger if that is a trafficking and they don't get out. There has been times where even myself, I have been hurt physically and sexually because somebody would try to help me. So you're better off probably getting someone involved, calling and Becky, you can have the phone numbers out there or your local law enforcement on that.
If it's an emergency, you call 911. If it's an emergency situation, if it looks like it's a controlled situation, but you're not quite sure, the National Human Trafficking Hotline is a good one to report tips to. A lot of times too, some of your local entities will have like a Crime Stoppers, and that's an anonymous way to tip. That's also a good resource here in our area. And then also the Department of Homeland Security is another area. Those are usually the more specialized that are able to investigate these cases. I'm here to tell you that not all law enforcement have been trained to identify these situations, which is one of a very concerning thing to me personally. And, I'm a firm believer that everybody should be trained and to identify this as first responders, because there are a lot of times that survivors has said to us, we were trying to tell them they didn't pick up on the signals because they didn't know what to look for. And so I would just encourage you all, we can give you a couple indicators, but if you have a local anti-human trafficking group, or if you want to go to calderfreedom.org, we do more extensive trainings on this that allow you to have better indicators, or the book also has all those warning signs in there as well.
And there is like a national line, like if people want to program, add a contact in their phone so that they're ready, like in case they find themselves it's not an everyday thing for most people. I mean, even when you're traveling a lot, and even, we have people here who do fly a lot, and if they're at an airport and they see something, it might not occur to them how out of the ordinary it is. But if it does, then the next step is, well, what do I do about it? So there is a national number that people could put into
the National
their phones.
Human Trafficking Hotline is that, and you can Google that. I don't know it right off the top of my head, but National Human Trafficking Hotline. If you put that in Google, you can get the 188 number.
Okay. All right. We'll add it to the Facebook comments, and maybe somebody here in Zoom can add it to the Zoom chat. So, steering the conversation just a little bit different. And one of the questions that we got before you guys came on tonight was, if you could speak to the truth that the transgender movement is really an example of trafficking.
I believe the Bible. And I know the word of God. I also know that traffickers use some of this as a way to alienate and isolate people. And so I'm really careful on how to answer that, because a lot of those that walk through the doors of Call to Freedom are confused about their sexuality. They're confused. They've been victimized by a man and they're a woman. I never want a man to touch me again. And so in that, their perspective gets distorted because of their victimization. And so I want to make sure that we have a lot that walk through our doors that struggle with their identity. And I want them to know that no matter what, we will serve you and you are welcome. We're going to give you the truth, in love, but that does not determine if we're going to help you or not. And one of the things too is that that's how traffickers work. They will take some of our movements and then go, those people don't care about you. If they cared about you, they would listen to you, and then they'll alienate. And so knowing truth will set you free. But also Jesus went into the prostitutes and the tax collectors, and he went after people. And so I do think there's a lot of distortion in the human trafficking, and that's the plan of the enemy.
Yeah, and I think the point that was being made by the person who asked this question, which I can see, is that there's a lot of organizations in our country who are using these same tactics to convince people that they are not really who God created them to be.
Gotcha.
So
yeah.
So it's a very similar approach.
Yeah.
So
And I just
go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Well, just a couple of other people brought up names. Victor Marx was one of them, and then also I guess that there's a TV show, IDTV, that goes after guys who go after young girls. Are you familiar with things like that, or are there other things that if people really want to know more on a national level, like different agencies that or TV programs that you've seen that are good and insightful and real?
Hollywood is interesting. Mary actually
Okay,
married.
I'm not even gonna.
Yeah, Mary's story has
like,
actually been scripted, and she's refused to give it to Hollywood. So if I'm to say, because of her integrity and truth, Mary's a truth seeker, and she doesn't want somebody to take her story, own it, and make it what they think it should be, and not let the truth be told. I'm sorry to speak for you, Mary, on that regard.
No, I mean, thank you, because I get a little, and there's some, I think some really wonderful information. Again, I only speak from my experience, and I can only do that. I cannot speak for other survivors and their journey. But I do know that there's some really good people out there that are doing the work. And then I also would probably know others and choose not to.
Yeah, and I think there's a
Partake.
movie coming.
I
Yep,
guess.
there's a movie coming out from Operation Underground Railroad, Tim Ballard's story, that is hitting movie theaters July 4th. I have not seen it. I've seen the trailers for it. I would hope it's real and gives a true perspective. But
Is this the
Sound
one
of
that
Freedom.
has Jim Caviezel?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've heard
So that
good
might be a
things
good
about
one to
that.
see, because I know we do have conversations where Operation Underground Railroad, and we do talk to them, and they do provide financial. They'll buy dogs, and they go in and they can sniff out pornography, on people's computers. So they do have some capacities to give on different local levels to do services. So I think that would be, a potential good one that's in the theaters now that Hollywood's probably trying to shut down, because there probably is some real perspectives of this. But it's hard for us to say, because we live life with survivors, specifically. If movies are 100% accurate, usually they're a little bit more just so they get people into the movie theaters and don't really give you the true story.
I get that. Well, that's the end of our questions, at least for the public. We still have a little bit of time left if you'll stay back for a few more minutes in case anybody has one or two questions off air. But before we go, can you tell people one more time about your ministry, the name of it, where to go to find more information, and about your book?
Yeah, absolutely. Call to Freedom. .org, www.calltofreedom.org. Our website has access to finding out more of the indicators, additional free trainings that we do via Zoom. Please sign up for those under events. And then also does have the book that Mary spoke about that is just a resource to parents. What initially had happened is Mary and Ruth wanted to publish this, and I didn't take them seriously. And all of a sudden God says, no, you're supposed to publish this, because I started getting calls from parents in Michigan and Florida and all over the United States saying, I think my daughter's being recruited. I think my son is being recruited. I don't have any local programs. I don't know who to reach out to. And I knew that God was telling me that we needed to do this. It's a great resource for warning signs to better understand how to protect your children. But if your children are going through those situations, or you're getting potential child getting groomed, it's a great resource to really understand what's happening. And then Mary and Ruth actually do a class, a parent connections class, to support parents that are in those situations. So go to calltofreedom.org and you can get all that information.
Is that class an online class or only in person?
We're going to do both. So
Okay.
we do both online and in person for that class. So yes.
That's great. Okay, and again, we're Creation Fellowship CNT, and you can find a list of our upcoming speakers by typing in tinyurl.com/CF Santee. That's C like creation, F like fellowship. Santee is spelled SANTEE. We're going to be taking the next 3 weeks off for a summer break, but we'll be back in 4 weeks from tonight, July 13th, with Sherry Seligson talking about animals of the ocean. And in the meantime, you can also visit our brand new archives page, which there's a link at that URL I just gave. And you can find links to our past presentations. We've had 72 as of tonight speakers who have spoken for us. And there's lots of great information available there. So with that, thank you so much again, Becky, and thank you, Mary, for coming tonight. And we're going to go ahead and sign off the public stream.